Hello, I'm Rosella Longinotti. I'm a mandala artist, a sound healer, inspirational writer, and I began as a hands-on healer in spiritual churches.
How did your journey start?
How did my journey start? Well, it's all those titles really, because I began as a healer and I did healing for many, many years, practicing in little churches usually. And during that time, I would often receive a lot of inspirational words, inspirational writing, so messages really, and mostly prayers, a lot of prayers, lots of pieces of writing about healing. And I felt very connected when I was healing. And eventually I became interested in sound for healing. And I kept coming across people who were doing sound, or I'd noticed that there were little workshops and I started to attend workshops. And eventually I trained as a sound healer. And I do believe that sound itself is very, very powerful. And I'm absolutely and utterly convinced that it was working intensively with sound that somehow activated what I do now, which of course is painting mandalas. And I feel as if everything to a certain extent is full circle, because, like a mandala, because there are so many aspects of my past that are all being used by the mandalas. So I still receive information or messages, if you like, but the messages are now part of the message of the mandala. So I'm still writing. I can use my sound healing as a meditation with the eyes open. So, for example, you can use the mandalas that I paint, and you can do what I can do. I, not you, I can share with you a meditation, a sound meditation, where the mandala is the image that you, the focus for you. And then you sound using your voice, or I would sound, and so we sound at the mandalas, and that's can be very effective, particularly as the very spiral-like mandalas often start to move. So I feel as if all my gifts really are one, well, not I call them gifts, but it's also my experience has all come together with the mandalas that I am now painting. I had a lot of anxiety and fear over what I was doing. Number one, I had believed since I was about 11 years old that I knew, it wasn't that I believed, I knew with certainty that I couldn't draw and I couldn't paint. Absolutely. And the only thing I can say is that there was such a strong compulsion. So when I was doing the sound healing, I would have this voice in my head, and of course, because I do the inspirational writing, I'm used to having a voice in my head. It sounds very weird, but it's this voice in my head, which is not my own, saying, you need to draw this person a picture with words. And so every time I did a sound healing, this is what I would be hearing. But I have to say at the same time that at the same time, I was also receiving this bombardment of geometric patterns. So every time I did a sound healing and I'd hear this voice, my mind would be saying, what will the person think? I can't draw, and what will they think? And that was always my answer to this compulsion. And then one day, somebody rang me up and said, would you please give my son some sound healing? She was anxious because he was going to a new school. And the appointment came in the morning, and the appointment was for later in the day. Well, it was actually early evening. And so in that space of time, from morning to evening, I sat at my kitchen table and I actually drew this mandala. And this is my very first affirmation mandala. And it's quite different from some of the other ones that I've done in more recent years, in the sense that I have left a blank space for him to fill out his own affirmation. And basically there's a little piece of guidance writing, and then there are these positive affirmations which I wrote on the mandala. And so this mandala is very, very much about changing the way that we think and changing the way that we believe by positive affirmations. So it took me quite a few years actually to overcome my own belief. And I think it's only actually in the most recent years, because this all happened in 2005. So the whole of 2005 and the whole of 2006, I was still struggling with this mindset that I couldn't draw, that I couldn't paint. And even if you said to me, yes, but you've just done that, I'd still be saying, yes, but I still can't draw. And I wasn't seeing it. I wasn't really relating to it as sort of an artist who could draw. It was, well, you know, I'm drawing these patterns, but it's not really drawing. And it wasn't until, so I went from 2005, I was doing these drawings, trying to draw what I was seeing, because at the time, if I sat and meditated, my third eye would be bombarded with these patterns, these geometric patterns, and they were three-dimensional. So for me, it was impossible to know how to draw. How do I draw them? I have no idea how to draw them, but I would have a go. And really, it wasn't until I was in the library and I found this book on mathematics, very basic mathematics, showing octagons, pentagons, and I was able to see how to construct them. So that really helped me to learn how to construct, let's say, a mathematical drawing. And so I guess I never really thought of it as drawing. And so really, for many years, I would still say to people, but I can't draw. And I remember it was New Year's Eve of 2005 going into 2006. And I wasn't at home, I was visiting friends. And my friend had taken me to an art store and we had bought a little set of paints. And the whole time we were in the shop, I was saying to my friend, but I can't paint. And she said, well, why don't you just have a go? But I can't paint. But, well, you can just have a go. But I can't paint. Because up until that time, I had been using coloured pens. And you know, coloured pens, they were very easy, fibre tip pens. And so anyway, it was New Year's Eve and we were supposed to go out. But during the day, I had started drawing a mandala. And it's actually, this is the mandala. It's a mandala called Renewal. And this is actually the size that it was. The original was this size. And it's the first mandala that I painted. And I remember the date so well because my friends went out to celebrate New Year and asked me if I'd like to go along. And I was so amazed that I was painting with these little tiny brushes. And actually I was creating something really quite beautiful. And I still, when I look at this mandala, which I do, I am always amazed that I had painted it and that I had actually painted a mandala. So yes, that was the very first mandala that I had painted. No. I mean, no and yes, because I realised as you were talking that I hadn't actually answered your question about how did I overcome it. So I'm glad we've brought it back to me. So I always doodled. I'm afraid I had very, I suppose you would say, attention deficit. I would always be doodling in any notebook or any piece of paper that was anywhere near me. But in an art class, I do remember when I was quite small, sitting next to someone who drew the most beautiful tree. It was unbelievable tree, and I would look at my own, I always would look at my own work and think, my goodness, you know, this, well, of course I was a child, but it was still nothing compared to other people in my class could do. So I always believed from a very early age. And then when I was about, I think 11 or 12, I did enjoy the art class, but I do remember my art teacher, it must have been something that I had done, and I remember him saying, "Oh, you're useless." And you know, I programmed in that belief that I was useless at art. And I'm sure as an adult now I can probably rationalize it and say, well, it was probably something to do with something that I had done rather than the wholeness of it. But I programmed in that. And I would say that as I began to work with the mandalas and I realized that I was creating something beautiful, and not only that, I became quite obsessed, actually. I still am. You know, I get so excited when I start a new mandala, and I really find it difficult to stop because I just have to keep painting. And I would say that it's the pleasure, the joy, and the passion that overrides our self-judgment. I can't say that it overrides the inner critic, because there are times, I think I shared with you earlier, that there is a mandala that I did this year and I almost tore it up. There were several times when I almost tore it up because I felt that I had already messed it up. But in actual fact, I kept going with it because I'd invested so much time drawing it. So I stayed with it, and now I'm glad I did. But I think it's the joy that we have. I feel as if it is the joy that we have, and the need to do something, the need to do whatever it is that we want to do, that overrides our self-judgment of it. If we want to do something so badly, then we're going to do it. We must do it. The inner critic, I feel the inner critic is maybe always lurking, but after a while it's possible. And I think the most interesting about that is that I have a mandala which is called Beautiful Imperfections, and everybody that who's seen my work develop know that for me this perfection thing is quite important, or has been. And so I remember a friend of mine came over and I showed her the latest mandala that I had painted, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it's not perfect." And I said, "What do you mean it's not perfect?" And so she pointed to the centre of it, and sure enough, for some reason I had been blind to the fact that it was completely and utterly uneven in the centre. And so I actually have called that mandala, I thought that was the name, Beautiful Imperfections. And so every now and again I notice that on one or two of my mandalas, especially if there's a little repeating pattern, every now and again I have maybe made a mistake, if you like, on it. And when I see those mistakes, I don't really think of them as mistakes now, but I think of them as the message, a message on the mandala rather than a mistake. So it's reminding me that actually to embrace all parts of myself rather than the part that I'm always trying to change. So rather than trying to change something or trying to make an aspect of myself perfect, when I accept myself, then actually it's much easier to be peaceful within, and it's much easier to move forward, because if you're always looking at what you have done and you're seeing it as a mistake, then you're always standing still in that space, judging. So you're always trying to make that more perfect. But when you let that go and you see that actually a mistake can be part of the beautiful pattern, the mistake can make something quite unique because you've done something that was unexpected. Yes, well, I do get asked to do personalised affirmation mandalas. These days they take me a lot longer than they did when I first started. And basically I prefer not to know the person. So a lot of my commissions have been gifts that somebody has done for somebody else who hasn't known that they're going to be receiving a gift. So the only thing I need usually is the name. So I'm given the name of the person, and that has to be the name that that person is going by. So if the person has changed their name, I work with the name that they've changed their name to, that they are working with or living with, that name. And then I meditate on the name. And so I meditate on the name, and then generally what happens is I receive a symbol or symbols. And then usually I always question this aspect of myself, but I like to do this for, let's say, for a week or several days, where I will just check in and see what's going on with the symbol or symbols that I've received, see if it's the same or if something else comes in. And then what happens is I will start drawing it. I call it doodling. So I will, let's say, doodle away at the symbols until I get a pattern of sorts or a picture that I feel is going to look interesting or beautiful, or I can make it into a mandala. And once I've drawn it, once I've really got it, it's settled, I think of it as being settled. What I do is I will then get out the watercolour paper, and I will usually do a small version first, and usually with the commission, particularly affirmation mandala, because they take me so long, I generally don't do them bigger than about 12 inches by 12 inches. But I'll do a smaller version first to test the drawing, and then I might start with the colours. And sometimes with those mandalas, sometimes the colours do change. So they may take some time. And during that process of the creating of them, I'm receiving inspirational guidance for that person during that whole process. So when I get the symbol originally, I might be getting, let's say, some keywords, some information, and then as I draw it, I'll be receiving perhaps, and then when I finish it, or when I'm painting it, I might be receiving more information. However, because I don't really work, I'm laughing at myself, I don't really work to a formula. So there are some mandalas that actually I don't receive any writing. So these are the personalized mandalas where I've been commissioned specifically. Sometimes I have to finish it completely, and then I receive the writing. It's almost as if when I've got it completely right, and I say that because it has to feel right. When they're personalized mandalas, they're very different from let's say, the generalized big mandalas that I do, where I don't really know what they're going to mean until I finished them. With these, when I've been commissioned to do something specific for someone, then when it feels absolutely right, then, and that's, I can't really explain that, but it just feels right. I look at it, it feels right, and then the information comes in. But it can be either way, because every single human being is different, and each mandala is different, and so it depends. It's a whole different process for each one.
Or is it?
I see the mandala, the personalized mandala, as an instrument for transformation, because there will be affirmations that the person should ideally work with. There will be some what I call keywords, and those keywords I don't elaborate on. So they could be connected to a past life, might not be a past life. I might give a keyword as a country, or I might say healing gifts, or it might mention a gift of some sort. And then there'll be these pieces of guidance writing, which will, in a way, show the person or direct the person into perhaps a change of thinking about themselves, or helping them to have a different kind of routine, or trying something new. Each one is very different. So I feel as if they are, in order to get the most out of them, you really do need to work with them. And the people that get back to me and make comments about them, it's usually the people that are working with their mandala. Well, surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because I have never thought of myself as a card reader in the sense of like tarot cards. In fact, I've always had a big resistance in a way to anything like that. And when I first started doing these, and it was apparent that every mandala had a very specific message on them, a friend of mine actually kept saying to me that you need to create a set of cards and do readings. And me being me, of course, I was terribly, terribly resistant. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do readings. It's too much responsibility, was what I felt, and also what I was saying to my friend. But my friend, in the end, she kept encouraging me and finally said to me, look, please just make a set of cards and we'll just look at them and you can show me, tell me what they are. And so what happened was I finally gave in and I created a small set of cards actually. It was only about 30 cards. And we met in a cafe and she asked me, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And I told her and she said, well, that's a reading. You can do readings. And I said, well, I'm not sure about this. Well, anyway, the next day I was going to stay with a friend in Croatia. And I showed my friend my cards. And she said to me, I asked her, do you know anybody that would like to have a reading? And she said, well, actually, I do. There's a very nice lady down the road. I'll ask her if she'd like to come for a reading. So she came. And the next thing I know, several hours later, there's a phone call. And she's asking if I would do readings for her friends. So I went to Croatia and I ended up doing all these free readings, I have to say, because at that time, my goodness, I was so nervous. And I was getting bottles of wine, bottles of grappa. So I was going home to my friend. I would go down to this lady's house and she would have her friends come over and I'd be doing these readings. And then I'd be getting homemade baked bread and I would be going back to my friend and say, oh, this is really good. This is wonderful. I think you should be doing more of these readings. And so in the very first week, because I was in an unknown place doing readings for people who I'd never met and was getting such amazing feedback, doing something that I hadn't wanted to do, that I felt was such responsibility. But I realised actually the mandala readings are much more about helping people, either to understand whatever is going on in their life or to helping them to maybe see the big picture again more easily and to make choices, because people always know actually what they want. They always do know the answer, but somehow the mind gets so fuzzy because they're thinking that the answer seems to elude them. And so what I've discovered is that very often in a reading, the readings that I do, that people will often, towards the end of the reading, they will often have reached the decision or will have realized something. And so these are my mandala cards, and it's a set of 44, and each mandala card has a very specific message, and they also have affirmations on them. So I made a little booklet, and you see this is again the synchronicity, because this lady that loved my work came in to help me, and we've got this little book printed. And so there are affirmations. So how you work with mandalas is that you would maybe pick a card every day and then you would read the information about it and then you would work with the affirmations. So they're positive affirmations. So for example, the abundant earth, I can read you that one. Divine timing is at work in my life. the earth supports my life journey. So just by saying an affirmation, a positive affirmation every day, what you're doing is you're reprogramming the thought process, so that actually all those thoughts that hold you up, or all those beliefs that you have about not being abundant, if you're replacing it with something that is counteracting that, if you like. But really what you're doing is you're taking the old CD or the old cassette out of your head, and what you're doing is you're putting in the new affirmation. I'm blessed with abundance. Whatever mandala it is that you pick, I'm blessed with good luck and good fortune. There's a good luck and good fortune mandala. And so what you're doing is you're constantly putting in this new affirmation, until after a while you get so used to it that you don't say the old one, the anxiety, the worry, the fear, or whatever it is. And so I feel that, for me, I love to do readings now, because I can see that they have a positive effect. And someone once said to me, oh, there are no negative cards in your set, as if, I suppose maybe some readings, a bit doom and gloom, I don't know. But I don't think of them as they don't have any bad messages, but what they do is they have cards, if you like, which may have a slight challenge on them. But the challenge is there for us, for you, for me, to realize that it's a challenge. But maybe it's only a challenge to me, but it may not be a challenge to you. So therefore, if I change the way I look at it, or I change my action, then actually I'm changing my perception of it. For a very long time, and I know this sounds odd, but within myself, I have said many, many times, I wish to be of service. It always makes me feel very emotional. It always hits my heart very strongly. But I have, for many, many years, felt that I want to be of service. And when I think about that, you can look out into the world, and there are so many people doing amazing things, helping others, charities. There's lots of people doing amazing work. And I don't see myself as someone that can go out there and do amazing things, but I would like to be of service, because when I help one person, perhaps one person gains something from a reading or is uplifted by a mandala, that person, if one person is transformed, then that person then goes out and is changing the way that they perceive themselves and changing the way that they interact with others. And so for me, that being of service, or helping people realize the best within themselves, I see that as a process which reaches out just gently and very quietly, but is having a ripple effect. It's rather like a mandala, is that each person is a jewel within a mandala. And so when we are really allowing that person to see the beauty within themselves, which I hope with the work that I do, that I help people to see their gifts, their talents. I help people to really step away from the self-judgment, from the blame and the guilt, whatever it is that they hold on to, and to realize just the beauty of their being and their potential. And then what happens is, I believe everything changes around us. And by lifting ourselves, we lift others. And so when I think of being of service, I think of it as a very gentle way. And I hope that that's the work that I'm doing. I believe it's the work that I'm doing. But I have requested that many times. Well, the one thing that the mandalas have taught me, and something that I have, I suppose, learned about myself, is that although I always think I have a lot of anxiety and fear within myself, I also realize that I do love something new. And I do love doing things that I've never done before. And so this journey with the mandalas for myself, it has been this continual process of moving through my comfort zone into the unknown and trying something new, things that maybe I've had mental resistance to, like reading the cards, being able to paint. It's been a continual journey of having to overcome my mindset and allow myself to, if someone asks me to do something, then I say yes. Then I go into a mild panic. Can I do this? And then I think, well, you just have to trust. And so what I've learnt from the mandalas, I know that wasn't your question, but what I've learnt from the mandalas is that this wonderful journey of these new opportunities, if you like, that come in. So when you say, what's next? For me, I think, well, I don't know what's going to come in next with the mandalas, but I know that I will hopefully, well, I know I will, accept the opportunities and go forward. But so far, the way that I seem to be working is always it always seems to be evolving. So hopefully that will continue. This is a piece close to my heart. It's, as I shared with you earlier, for years, when I first started writing, which was when I was healing, I always wanted to do, it was in my head, I wanted to do a sort of self-help book, but I always saw it as a toolbox. I would always, in my head, it was always going to be a toolbox book. So it was a self-help book, but it was a toolbox. And those were always the words I had in my head. And I have never, all these years, it never presented itself. And then I think it was a couple of years ago, I received a piece of writing that was exactly a toolbox. Tool 1, tool 2, tool 3. And then after I had written it, I realized that I could put the mandalas to it. And so I created it's a very little book of tools. And of course, it's very different to a normal, what I call normal exercise book of tools in a way. It has very different, I think it has very different tools in it. But of course, there's the usual ones too. But you see, my third tool is divine timing. And that's having the realization that divine timing is very important in our life. And so it becomes why is it a tool? Why would divine timing be a tool? That seems really strange. But when you think about it, sometimes we are pushing for something to happen, or we have these expectations that we have to have this and we have to have it now. But when we relate to divine timing, to a certain extent, it helps us to let go of that expectation. But it's also knowing that everything that comes to us is for our highest good, that we are working always with divine timing. And that synchronicity that we talked about earlier is always going to be at work when we have this divine timing, because there is a plan, if you like, at work, a divine plan. Well, that's what I believe anyway. And so sometimes the tools are not really the kind of tool that you might find in other little books, but I made it all by hand. And I'm very proud of it because I find it very beautiful. My favourite page of all, I just have to show you before we finish, is my little mandala garden, which is here. And it's everything in my life is blossoming right now, which is very true. And I want to thank you for taking the time to interview me. It's been a pleasure.